Hello and welcome to another episode of Piano TV. I'm Allysia, your host, and today I wanted to just touch on a really interesting topic that I came across when I was rereading Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. It's one of my favorite books. It's really applicable to piano players, even though it's not specifically piano focused. But what caught my eye this time around on a reread was the 4DX framework. And this is based on a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution by Chris McChesney and Sean Covey. So I'll get into the 4 disciplines, but first I want to back up and explain why I think this is important for you as a piano player. Each of these 4 disciplines is meant to improve the quality of your practice, essentially. And I would argue even not even just the quality of your practice, but your enjoyment of the practice. And these ideas have been well road tested. You can check out his book if you want to get deeper into it, because obviously in this video we're not going to cover the same amount of depth that the book covers, but I figured I'd give you an overview because I think the 4 ideas are really interesting. I think they're really useful. And I do use some variation of these already, but rethinking about it and rereading it gave me some new ideas for my own practice to start trying. So let's get into it. The first discipline is to focus on the wildly important. It's better to pick a few really inspiring, significant, wild goals than to try to do everything. And this is the pitfall that I always fall into because I want to do everything. I'm really enthusiastic about life in general, if you couldn't tell already. And it just makes me want to dive into everything that I'm learning about. But to keep focused on what really matters is going to obviously significantly improve your results. And I know that. It's just so hard to do it. Your goals additionally have to be specific and not generic. So a lot of people, when I first start talking to them about what they'd like at the piano, if they haven't really thought about it too much, it's kind of like their idea is to just, I want to become better at the piano. But that's a really flimsy goal because it doesn't really spark any type of zest or interest or energy. Become better at the piano is so vague. You can't really measure it. You can't really put anything, you can't hang anything on that goal. In order for a goal to be inspiring, and become better at the piano is not an inspiring goal, it has to, I think, be a little bit scary. It has to be a little bit outside of your comfort zone. So for example, if you're just starting out on piano, an inspiring goal for you may be learn the first of Chopin's ballads on piano. And that's a really crazy goal if you're just starting out. That's a crazy goal even if you've been playing for a while. But if you love that piece and if it fires you up to kind of have that as your homing beacon as you practice, then that is a worthwhile goal, and it's specific and scary. Another thing that's essential to setting your goals is to make sure there's some kind of reward attached to it. For piano players, I think for the most part our rewards are going to be the creation itself. So the goal and the reward are the same. If the goal is to play a Chopin ballad, then the reward is to be able to play that Chopin ballad and the satisfaction and pride and everything that comes with that experience. So just make sure too, when you're thinking about what your wild and crazy goals are, do they have a reward attached to them as well? The second discipline is to act on lead measures. And I'll need to explain this one a little bit, but I'll try not to get too lost in the minutiae. Now, this is the one I find where a lot of people fall off the bandwagon, because it's one thing to set a goal, but it's another thing entirely to then be able to take that goal and find a way to measure it. So in the book, they differentiate lag measures versus lead measures. So a lag measure would be something like a customer survey review, or a customer review survey after having a product or something like that, where having the survey will give you information, but it's not going to change what happened with the product. It might change future products, but it's kind of like a afterward as opposed to a forward. It's being reactive, not proactive. Where a lead measure is proactive, it's taking steps to do something before the event. So to bring this down to earth for piano players, because our lead measure is basically always the same. It's to, and I'm going to quote Cal Newport on this, time spent in a state of deep work dedicated toward your wildly important goal. So for us, this is just going to be our piano practice sessions. So a lag measure might be reviewing our piano practice sessions, maybe doing a weekly review. We're going to talk about that a bit later. But a lead measure would be influencing the conditions of our piano practice session before we practice. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So just some ideas to get the ball rolling of things you can do to affect your piano practice sessions before you have them. One is try to set aside private time. This is a really, really tough one for me because my piano is in a main room and my daughter loves coming out and hanging out when I'm playing piano. But without the privacy and personal space, it can be really tough to concentrate. Even if it's just someone in the same room who's not really paying attention. Like if Michael happens to be around when I'm practicing, I'm less focused than if I'm completely by myself. So privacy, I think, is one important lead measure for piano players. Another one is being able to dedicate like a good block of time. Like I'm talking like a good 30-minute chunk or a good 1 hour chunk, depending on kind of where you're at, without distractions, without things beeping at you or having to get up and go do things, because all of these distractions are going to take us out of our state of deep work, and then we have to kind of fight to get back into that flow state again. So just a couple things, just start thinking like that. Is your practice space too cold? Is it too hot? Is it like drafty? Like, are there any external issues with it? Is it really dark and you don't like some of my students will refuse to practice piano, and when I start digging into it, I realize it's because their piano is sitting in a dank, dark basement. So think about things like that, and that would be your lead measure essentially as a piano player. Discipline number 3 is to keep a compelling scorecard, because it's true. We tend to be competitive, and we tend to, even for those of us who aren't by nature as competitive, we tend to perform better with a little bit of a competition, even if that competition's just with ourselves and there's no one else involved. So with piano practice, if it's our goal to have deep and focused practice sessions on a regular basis, then it stands to reason that it would be useful to have some very obvious physical artifact of our progress in that regard. So this is kind of based on what Cal Newport was suggesting in his book. But one thing that could be really useful, and I'm going to try this myself, is to just have a little chart somewhere really obvious, like maybe on the wall where you practice, like somewhere where you're going to see it every time you practice, where each week is a column. So and then you just draw an X for every focused piano practice session you have, so that at a glance you can kind of look at it and see how much you've done. And this idea goes back to Jerry Seinfeld, but it's false. Jerry Seinfeld didn't actually say this or do this, but the idea that his way of improving comedy was to just practice every day, and for every day that he practiced, he drew a big X on his calendar, and eventually it created this long unbroken streak. And he just didn't want to break the streak. So every day he was putting an X on the calendar because he just wanted to continue the streak. So that's the kind of competition and the kind of self-competition I'm talking about. I'm not talking about anything crazy with marks and awards and whatever, stuff like that. But even to be able to look at your calendar or to look at a chart or something and see this nice stream of X's, or however you choose to mark things, can be really inspiring. It can kind of spark your inner sense of competitiveness in a positive way. And the fourth and final discipline is to keep a cadence of accountability. So for most of you, what that's going to look like is a weekly or regular lesson with a piano teacher. For those of you who have taken in-person piano lessons, you know that is a strong motivator to actually get some practice done, because it's really embarrassing when you, and I say this from personal experience, when you show up to your piano lesson and you're totally unprepared, and you kind of just bomb your way through all your pieces. So that could be a really helpful thing to have. Now, whether or not you have or don't have a piano teacher, another accountability thing that I like to use is a weekly review. So this is where at the end of every week on Sunday, just going through everything that I practice. I usually take light notes about my piano practice sessions. So at the end of the week, I can kind of look through my notes, see how much I accomplished, how I felt about what I accomplished. I like looking to see if I've done anything tangible. So if in the last week I can look and say wow, I was here with this piece and now I'm here. Maybe my piece was at 60 beats per minute and now I'm at 75. That's something where I can look at and say yes, I made progress. But if I'm looking at and it says I've been practicing the same pieces but it doesn't look like anything's changed or improved, having that weekly review is good, because you can see that and say, well, nothing really seemed to move or happen in this week's piano practice sessions. So what can I do in the upcoming week to make something move? It's not very motivating if you're looking at your pieces that you've practiced all week and nothing seemed to change with them. So it's you put in this time, but nothing's happened. That's very demotivating. So I find the weekly review just a really great accountability tool, even just to be accountable to yourself. That combined with having like an in-person piano teacher, I think is a fantastic combination. Obviously, it's not within the range of everyone, but if you can have it, it's great. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I encourage you to check out the book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, if you're interested in these ideas and you just want to see them in much more depth. It's kind of interesting because I have an interest in reading personal development literature, like be it on creativity, growth, like any stuff like that. I really like reading those kinds of books. And one thing I didn't consider until like in the last couple of years is how much overlap they have into the discipline of practicing piano, of like achieving excellence at something. There's a lot of overlap. So sometimes when I come across these ideas, I like sharing them with you guys just because I think it always helps to have new ideas of looking at things, and it always helps to try to find ways to make our piano practice life more enjoyable and more rewarding. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed this little video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Whereas a lead measure is proactive, and it's where, okay, let me explain this better.